everybody, I'm Nicole Vulcan, editor of The Source Weekly, and why don't you introduce yourself and then let people know why you're running?
Sure. My name is Perkins, and I am the mom of 3 kids, 2 bunnies and a fish, I always say. And I was born in Oregon, but grew up actually in Boston. And my entire family is still in Oregon, so we've come here, multiple times a year my entire life. And my grandmother, who is 103, lives in Sun River by herself still, and moved to Sun River in the 80s. And so we've been coming to the Bend area, my whole life, and have really seen Bend develop from, this town of, under 20,000 to, what it is now, and have always wanted a reason to move here, like so many others. And a couple of years ago, we got the opportunity to move here. And we were just so impressed, kind of going from like being a tourist to being a resident of Bend by all the things it offered, schools and the parks and the concerts and the food and the abundant nature. But one of the things that I really struggled with and that I saw missing was that there was not a support system for my 2 children that are Black. And we kind of knew when we were moving here, that there weren't a lot of people of color that were living here, but there just wasn't that support system for them. And so in 2018, I co-founded Embrace Bend, which started as the support system for parents and kids of color, and is really sort of transitioned into a nonprofit. And our mission right now is to dismantle white supremacy, and we do that through organized activism and community care and learning opportunities in the community. And through that, and through my other community work with my neighborhood association, with Moms Demand Action, at my children's school, where we are now, I sort of saw another need, and that is that I really feel like that at a city level, we really need to be, representing the values of the people of Bend. And so that is why I decided to run. And my 3 sort of campaign values are inclusion, access, and economic equity. And I feel like there needs to be a voice at the table that is bringing in other voices to the table that are not normally as part of the process. I also feel like the city council needs to do a better job of reaching out into the community, not expecting the community to come to them. And finally, that we need to really address sort of, I call it like the trifecta of economic equity, which is childcare, transportation, and housing. Because if one of those things is missing, then it just sort of creates an unsustainable living situation for the people of Bend.
So we're going to touch on a lot of the things you mentioned,
Sure.
Again, give you a little bit more chance to elaborate. But as anybody who's watching this notices, we're doing things a little different this year because we're in the midst of a global pandemic. Mm-hmm. So in your mind, how has the position of the city councilors changed in the midst of a pandemic?
I think that the city council did a really good job at the beginning of creating the emergency order, and did a pretty decent job of communicating. I would have liked to see them work through other channels, not just communicating to people that have internet, not just communicating with people that speak English. And I think it got better over time because we were all learning, right? We were all learning during this process, and things were changing, by the minute. I think that the big problem happened when we let this emergency order run out. And I mean, if you watch cases as religiously as so many of us do, right, these days, you cannot blame this all on tourism, but you can see the spike happening, during the summertime. And now starting to decrease a little bit as people are leaving our city. And I wish that the city had been a little firmer and not just relied on encouraging or discouraging people from coming. I made the joke that, I can encourage my kids to go to bed all I want, but it's until I say, no, you need to go to bed now or there will be consequences. That's when they start to listen. And I felt like that was a little bit of the problem. I had a friend that was thinking of coming here, and her the Airbnb owner said, well, oh no, it's just a recommendation. And by the way, you can't have your money back, So I think that there could have been a lot better, communication and enforcement earlier on, and we would have seen a lot of changes during the summer.
Mm-hmm. This is a little bit related. Sometimes we'll, double up.
Yep.
What does leadership look like for a city councilor today?
I think that one of the things that I'm seeing missing right now, and sort of a gap that I would like to fill is, first of all, sort of this just general empathy, right? There's a lot of talk about listening and how, oh, we listen. But are you really taking in the words that are being said to you by people that do not feel, that they're being heard right now? I think that the way that the city council is set up right now is it doesn't make, it's sort of the people that are in the know, right? The people that have the money or have the connections are the ones that are heard the most. And I feel like, as city councilors, our job is to reach out to everyone in our community and to find the people that are afraid to come to a meeting or call into a meeting, as we do now, or that you kind of address all the other barriers, so that the problem is I feel like a lot of the decisions that are being made in city council are being made with a very specific person or organization or group that is overrepresented. Mm-hmm. And so I think, from a leadership standpoint, just need to really understand that a lot of the times, leadership means you're going to be yelled at and you're going to be called out. And in the work that I've done, I've been called out and multiple times for not listening, in the right ways, and really saying that just because that's not the way you would address the situation, that doesn't mean that's not, the best way to address the situation. Mm-hmm.
And again, you touched on this, but because our editorial board has come up with these questions, I want to be sure to ask them in the same order mm-hmm. for everyone. What should the city's position on tourism be as the pandemic appears to be stretching into 2021?
Like I was saying earlier, I think that we should have, the emergency order should have, been extended throughout the whole summer. I think that we were all suffering. We all wanted to go outside. We all wanted to see other people, and it was just a natural human reaction that people started flooding downtown and going out and socializing. But we should have either done something like a mandatory 2-week quarantine, for people from Bend. And I want to make sure that we understand that there were a lot of people from Bend that traveled other places and came back and brought COVID here too. So I think that we should have also, done a 2-week quarantine for those travelers and mandated that as well as people coming to our town having to, quarantine themselves. I don't think that all tourists are bad. I think a lot of the tourists were very responsible that came here. But just like in the general public, there are those that weren't, and that really wanted to come here because, oh yay, we're in phase 2. We can do this, and this, before the mask mandate and all that kind of mm-hmm. stuff. So I think we really suffered from that as a community, and unfortunately, our caseload started to skyrocket for us. Mm-hmm.
What can we do at the local level to fuel Bend's economy and start to recover from this recession that we're now finding ourselves in?
Well, I think, a few things. I think we need to, as we rebuild from this, I think we need to be, we have an opportunity here to sort of rebuild in a way that is inclusive, not only just from a community level, but from a financial level as well. And so I think that this is something that we don't want to sort of let slip away as we do recover. I think that, we need to make sure from the city that we are supporting small businesses as much as we possibly can, supporting, them, public-private partnerships. We need to be, I think the transportation bond is actually a way to help businesses. The more of, the more our community can get around and safely transport themselves to other places, the more that we can invigorate the core of the city. I think is also a really important way to help with our recovery. I think that the more affordable housing that we have also helps with our recovery, and the more housing options that we have helps with our recovery. If people can afford to get themselves around town and live here, that's another way that the city can help.
Okay. You mentioned the transportation bond, and we definitely want to talk about that. What's your position on the transportation bond going forward on the ballot this fall, and also the pieces of the transportation bond?
I support it. I will vote for it. I support it going on the bond in November. I think the longer that we delay having a transportation bond, the more of a situation we're going to get ourselves in. I think it was really great that the City Council is delaying, any of the debt until 2022, which gives us a chance to start recovering as a city, and that they're saying in 2022, I think that the debt is going to be something like $30. So I think that from a COVID level, that was a really responsible decision that the City Council made. If you talk to anyone in the city, transportation is one of, there's the number one thing that they generally talk about. No one's happy, car drivers, bicyclists, pedestrians, bus riders. And I think that we need to kind of take a step back from the bond and look at the transportation system plan that was put in place over a course of 2 years with, members of the public, businesses, a diversity of, groups from the sort of the chamber to the environmental center, really coming together and with a really, really solid process. And I think we need to acknowledge that process, and that this is the best possible plan that we can have for our city right now, because it does respect sort of all of the different methods of transportation. From a biking and a pedestrian standpoint, just being able to have safer crossings, being able to support greenways and better ways of getting across the city, for cars to help congestion. For transit, the idea of supporting mobility hubs so that people can not just clog Hawthorne Station, but can be on and around town, being able to get on different bus routes easier. I think there's that this bond is the best possible solution that we have right now, and I really do hope that the people support it, because otherwise this delay in working on these much needed improvements is just going to continue and continue.
Mm-hmm. So, total pivot now.
Okay.
Last week was a significant event for a lot of Bendites with the ICE activity that was in our city. What is your assessment of the city and the city police's handling of that situation? Do you believe it was appropriately handled by the city and the police?
I would have liked the city, members of our city council, the 5 that were not there, and our police department to be with the people that were there. If I were on the city council, what I would have done is what I did do in my personal capacity, and just be with the people, right? Clearly, this was not just a couple of violent protesters here from Portland. No, this was the community coming out and literally standing in front of a bus and saying this is not okay. I think I'd like the city and the Bend Police Department to also acknowledge that something else was going on there. There's no way that they were transporting 2 people on 2 huge buses and numerous unmarked vehicles. So we also need to kind of think about what else did we stop that day. I would have liked to see the Bend Police Department, rather than just have the chief coming in at the end of the night and standing literally on a soapbox and talking to the people, to again be walking around the crowd and talking to them and saying, what are your concerns here? John Hummel came into that crowd and literally stood there in the hot sun for hours and exhaustedly answered questions, because people were scared, they were frightened, they were confused, they didn't really know what was going on. And I think that's what our city officials should have been doing and our police department should have been doing. Maybe that a lot of the answers to the questions that Hummel gave were not satisfying to people because they didn't like what he was saying, but he was talking about the reality of the situation, right? And I think the Bend Police Department could have done a better job specifically of really talking about the reality of where we are and what power we have, as a city police department versus the federal government or the federal police, and government, I guess, in these situations, and really, again, just having people feel like they're being heard. And I don't feel like a lot of people felt that way. Hence why you heard so many people, at the city council meeting on Wednesday, talking about that. Like, we were not heard, and where were you? And the fact that no one else gave a statement about this at all. I didn't hear any words from the rest of the counselors about what happened. That really concerns me and worries me, because this was a pivotal moment for our city. I mean, the fact that it was talked about in the national news and international news, Al Jazeera picked it up. It means something, right? It means that something really significant happened here, and just to ignore it and to act like nothing happened is really concerning to me.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like the city is doing enough to support diversity, equity, and inclusion? And if not, what would you do?
I think the city took a great, huge, awesome step on Wednesday by creating the Human Rights and Equity Commission. That was a lot of work. It's something I've been promoting for the last couple of years. It was exhaustive work from the DI task force, from Allyship and Action. And to see the city council vote on that, the creation of it, I think is going to be really important for our city, because not only will this commission sort of help with, making sure that all policies and things like that are, looked at with an equity lens, but it'll also give people of color in our community, in all marginalized communities, a place to go and to really address grievances that oftentimes, you can't address with police because they're not considered a crime, and work on sort of restorative practices. I think that's a really key component. And to go to sort of a group of your peers and talk about, something that happened to you is very different than, maybe an undocumented, person going into the Bend Police Department and saying, this happened to me, on the street the other day. So I think that is a huge step, but it is a first step. And I think that the city council needs to do a better job of making sure that people who are not normally at the table in the decision-making circles are in these decision-making circles for everything from transportation to the committee structure, which is really, really exclusive, and is such a vital way for people to participate in the city, to sort of change those policies on how people get into committees. And I think that just looking at everything from this lens of equity, I think oftentimes people think of DEI as like a single issue thing, but it's everything, right? And everything that the environment, transportation, housing, everything needs to be looked at from that angle of who's not in the room right now, who's not being asked about this, and who is disproportionately affected by this policy.
Mm-hmm. Where do you stand in the debate to defund the police, and would you support transferring some city funds from cops to social services, for example?
I think that everybody agrees on one simple fact, and that's that cops should not be responding to mental, to issues of mental distress, or also to issues of homelessness, and that's not their role as cops, and it often escalates a situation. And so I think, again, I'm really happy that the Crisis Stabilization Center is now open 7 days a week, which it was not before. I think that the city, should be as involved with taking that part out of policing as possible. I think that we also need to understand that policing in general is incredibly traumatic and stressful work, and so to any way that the city can support through funding, the police department, taking care of its officers and making sure that they are, dealing with the trauma themselves, because oftentimes when that trauma is not dealt with, it goes to the people that they're supposed to be keeping safe, right, in a bad situation. And I think that we need to transfer a lot of the social part of social services part of policing to other places. And specifically, we also need to really work on implicit bias training with our police department. I feel like, I haven't heard many people talk about, physical aggression towards marginalized communities, but I've heard a lot of people talk about bias. And I think that, a little 2-hour video that they watch, once a year is not enough. And we need to bring, I'm really excited, and I hope that Krantz will actually go through with this, but really make a more robust community committee for the police department. It exists now, but it is not doing a lot. I think that could make a huge difference in our police department.
Cool. So growth is kind of the story of Bend.
Mm-hmm.
It brings a lot of challenges to the table. What do you see as the top 2 challenges facing Bend in this regard, and what would you propose to deal with those challenges?
Well, everyone's going to tell you transportation and housing, right? And I agree with that completely. And I'd love an opportunity later on to talk about housing. But I'd like to kind of maybe take a different track on that. And I think that one thing that a lot of people don't realize is childcare, early childcare. Before the pandemic, only 1 in 3 childcare slots were open for kids 0 to 5. And now after the pandemic, they're saying that up to 50% of childcare facilities, early childcare facilities, are going to be closing. My 4-year-old's is closing because of financial reasons. And so it's easy to say, oh, but that's just for a really specific group of people, and why should I care if I'm a senior? Well, it matters for a couple of reasons. One is that kids do better if they're in an early childcare. There's a reason why they call it Head Start, right? They get a head start on school and they do better. But secondly, from an economic standpoint, working parents need to put their kids somewhere, and they need to put their kids somewhere safe, and they need to put their kids somewhere that is supportive of their kids and teaches their kids. And so I think we as a city need to do a better job of partnering and thinking of creative solutions for childcare, especially as we grow so dramatically as a city. And so and secondly, I'd like to kind of take a different tack on growth. And so I think that the biggest issue with growth is equity, and I don't just mean for people of color. I mean, I think as we're growing as a city, I want to make sure that we're growing in a way that is not only benefiting one specific type of person, right? And that's what I see, right? I mean, I see that the growth of this city benefits me, right? It benefits me. I live in Northwest Crossing. I am financially stable. My kids can bike to school, safely. They can wander the streets till dark. I can be at a restaurant in 1 minute on my bike. What that is for me, I would like to see for everyone in Bend, right? And it shouldn't depend on what neighborhood you live in. It shouldn't depend on if you make over X amount of dollars a year. It shouldn't depend on if you're straight. It shouldn't depend on if you're cisgender. It shouldn't depend on if you're white. And it shouldn't depend on what you do for a living. So that's an aspect of growth that I would like to see us really think a little bit more about as we grow so rapidly.
Mm-hmm. So that does dovetail into my next question about affordable housing.
Yeah.
It's been a part of the city council campaigns for at least the last decade.
Yeah.
But the programs in place can't keep up with the demand. So what concrete actions would you support or take to address housing for the low and middle income earners?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think everyone's going to tell you the same thing. Oh, we need to streamline the process. We need to, with zoning and codes and with developers, right? We all agree on that. Everyone, no matter what, political party you're in. I think we all agree that. I think the number one thing that we have to do is just more housing and more different types of housing, right? I mean, we all know, we saw that statistic that a single-family house is, $529 now for median. That's not sustainable. That's not something that is possible for a lot of our, our community. So we need, triplexes, duplexes, single room occupancy, micro units, tiny houses. We need as many different, apartments, condos, anything that can, because with the more different types of housing we have, the more options people have and are able to sort of buy into this housing system. And I also think that we need to get really creative about our housing. I am a huge proponent of the BCD and of growing up and not out. And I think that it benefits not only in the sense that you're developing and invigorating your urban core of the city, which is so important, especially at the city that has grown like Bend has. Your downtown needs to grow with you. But also just having housing in the city so people can bike to work, they can recreate, they can eat, they can shop, they can live, all in one area. It helps the city as a whole. And I think we need to look at sort of more opportunity zones like that, where we can kind of go up and not necessarily build out.
Mm-hmm. So that leads into discussion about homelessness. There's hundreds of people living in encampments in and around our city. It's a big issue for a lot of voters. But what is your position on the city itself taking part in developing a camp, like a supported camp for houseless folks?
I think the first thing I always like to talk about with homelessness is that these are our neighbors. A lot of people on social media would like you to think that the homeless, along with all of our activists, have apparently come in on a bus from Portland every day, but they simply do not. And it's an actual fact that most of the homeless in the city have been here for quite some time, right? So these are our neighbors, and I always kind of think of it as like, if my next door neighbor needed something, what would I do to help them? And I think we like to just sort of pass it off, or like, oh, these are other people, right? Like, we don't know who these are, because it's easier, because then we don't have to deal with it, like, oh, they bug me, they this, they that, I think the city has to stop depending on nonprofits to take care of this problem for them. The fact is, it's growing, and I'm sure it's going to grow even more rapidly now with COVID. And that the city really has to sort of address what are the systemic things that are happening, with homelessness. And yes, I am supportive of camps, and I am supportive of a permanent warming shelter for our city. But I think we need to be more proactive about it and look at other cities. There are so many other examples, and they were just talking about that at the city council meeting on Wednesday. There's so many other examples of other cities that are doing this. In Oregon, building tiny home communities, micro units. They were talking about that as well. That can provide either a first step for housing, or just a safe place that is not a shelter, like a camp, for the homeless population. Because it's housing first, right? I mean, the first thing that you have to think about is housing. But there are a lot of homeless that aren't there, right? So we need to also kind of go to them and not just kick them from place to place. Okay, now we need to build a sewer line here, so let's move you over here, and let's move you over here, and let's move you over here. But create a supportive housing environment for them, in a camp, I think is a great idea.
So, do you believe that city council members, as well as people serving on various committees, should be paid a living wage for their service?
100%. Could not agree more. I think if you actually see how much work the city council puts in, I mean, it is a lot. I mean, just listening to a meeting, from as just a regular resident of Bend, right? I mean, that was like a 6-hour meeting on Wednesday. They do that twice a month. They respond to constituents. They are members of committees, and it shouldn't be people just like me that can do something like this, right? I'm financially stable. I don't need to work another full-time job. I can commit hours upon hours to the city council, but it shouldn't just be people like me, because then you're just getting voices and people that look and act just like me, right, and think like me. So 100% agreed.
Last question, and
Yes.
then I want to give you a chance to just share anything else that we didn't cover.
Sure.
Name one critique of the current city council and what you would do differently. Maybe more than one.
I've got a couple. I'd like to sort of address two. One is something that's come up recently that's really been upsetting to me to watch, and that is the way that the women on the council are often rebuffed and demeaned and dismissed by the men on the council. And that to me is totally unacceptable. It's something that any woman who's ever been in any form of environment has had to deal with their whole lives, and it has to stop. It's not when city council meetings are going on, I'm getting texts from all all of my friends and peers and coworkers saying the same thing. They're seeing this, and it's really upsetting to watch, and that there is no place for that in city government. And second is just that I think that that I kind of touched on this before, but just having people speak for 90 seconds and then cutting them off and sort of pushing it to the side is not the way that we should be running a city council meeting. It's not the way they should be, as representatives of the people. And to do a much better job about prioritizing public comment, hearing what people are emailing. We have no idea. We have no idea how many emails they get. We have no idea what the emails say. And making it easier for people to comment, maybe soliciting input rather than just expecting people to know, oh, this is the email address, or this is the I can go sit on the phone for an hour and a half and wait to be called on while this timer ticks down, and then I get cut off in the middle of saying something that's important to me. So I think the city council needs to do a much better job about listening to the people that it represents.
Mm-hmm. Great. Is there anything else that we didn't cover? That's one thing, and then also just maybe a recap of why people should vote for you.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else we should cover. Well, I guess I wanted to meet here because this school is something that is so important to my family because it provided a supportive environment, a safe environment for my kids. Like I said earlier, my kids can bike here and be here in 2 minutes. They can all safely exit the school, cross the streets, and be home. And not everyone has that, and I would, really, really like, as a city councilor, to help try to create more environments like this. Environments that should not just be someone of privilege that gets to appreciate and enjoy and bend.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you want to say about your pitch to voters about why to support you?
Well, I think the most important part of being a city councilor is that you represent the people. So I not only represent the people, but I represent the process. I respect the experts that go to the city. I'm not going to be nitpicking community processes if they're true community processes. I think that I represent the values of the people of Bend.
Thanks so much for contributing to our democracy and for running for council. I know even that's a significant amount of time and energy. So
thank you.